Commander Krylar stood on the bridge of the Voidhammer, her posture impeccable as she surveyed the holographic battle reports hovering before her. The Xylosian fleet had successfully blockaded the Terran mining colony on Helios. 9. A strategic victory that would severely impact the Federation's resource chain. She allowed herself the briefest moment of satisfaction, an indulgence she rarely permitted, before dismissing the tactical display with a flick of her six-fingered hand. "Status of the prisoners?" she asked, her voice carrying the metallic undertone common to her species. Her second-in-command, Officer Varys, straightened even further. "Processing continues according to protocol, Commander. 43 captives, primarily mining personnel, with 7 military escorts. Any officers?" "No, Commander. The highest rank is a Terran Field Sergeant from their Corps of Engineers. Medical Division." Krylar's silver eyes narrowed slightly. Engineers were always worth deeper interrogation, regardless of rank. Their practical knowledge often proved more valuable than the theoretical strategies of officers. "Have this sergeant isolated from the others and prepared for preliminary assessment. I want a full capabilities profile." "Yes, Commander," Varys acknowledged, transmitting the orders through his neural interface. Krylar returned her attention to the vast darkness of space visible through the command viewport. The stars glittered against the void, cold and distant, much like the calculating intelligence behind her own eyes. She had risen through the ranks of the Xylosian Star Fleet through ruthless efficiency and an unwavering devotion to logic. Emotion was weakness, compassion was inefficiency. These principles had made her the youngest fleet commander in 3 generations. The Voidhammer was the embodiment of these principles, sleek, deadly, and designed with maximum functionality. Every system, every crew member operated as part of a precisely calibrated machine. There was no room for error, no tolerance for deviation. When the alert chime sounded across the bridge, Krylar felt a flash of irritation, an emotion she immediately suppressed. "Report," she demanded. "Commander," the chief systems officer called from his station, voice tense. "We're detecting anomalous power fluctuations in the quantum stabilization matrix. The core temperature is rising beyond acceptable parameters. Implement standard containment procedures," she ordered without hesitation. "Already attempted, Commander. The automated systems are not responding correctly. Manual override is showing similar irregularities." This was unprecedented. The Voidhammer's systems were triple redundant, with failsafes upon failsafes. "How long until critical?" she asked, already moving toward the engineering console. "At current progression, 37 minutes until irreversible cascade. Evacuate non-essential personnel from the affected sections. Deploy engineering teams Alpha through Delta. I want solutions, not excuses." The bridge erupted into coordinated activity as her orders were relayed. Krylar studied the diagnostic readouts herself, her mind rapidly calculating variables and possibilities. The quantum stabilization matrix was essential for maintaining the ship's dimensional integrity during faster-than-light travel. A catastrophic failure would tear the Voidhammer apart at the subatomic level. 20 minutes later, as she stood in the main engineering bay watching 4 separate teams of the fleet's finest technical minds failing to resolve the crisis, Krylar faced an unsettling realization. "Commander," the chief engineer approached, his normally confident demeanor replaced with evident distress. "The matrix instability appears to be linked to the Terran stealth technology we integrated after the Orion Belt conflict. We understand the basic principles, but the underlying code architecture is resistant to our diagnostic protocols. You're telling me our flagship is being destroyed by incompatible code?" Krylar's voice was deadly quiet. "Not exactly, Commander. The technology is functional, but the emergency protocols we're attempting to engage are triggering security countermeasures we didn't fully decipher. It's as if it knows we're not its creators," she finished for him. "How long?" "Less than 15 minutes until the point of no return." Krylar made the decision in seconds. "The Terran engineer. Bring him. Now." "Commander?" The chief engineer looked stunned. "A prisoner?" In the core systems chamber. Would you prefer complete molecular disintegration, Chief? She asked coldly. Bring him. Maintain maximum security protocols. He is a tool, nothing more. As the guards rushed to execute her orders, Krylar felt no uncertainty. The use of an enemy asset to preserve Xylosian lives and property was perfectly logical. The risk was calculated. The choice was clear. What she couldn't calculate was how this decision would forever alter the perfect machine that was her existence. Sergeant Aaron Kale sat on the edge of the too small bunk in his detention cell, methodically tearing a strip from the bottom of his undershirt. The thin fabric would make a decent impromptu bandage for the plasma burn on his forearm. Nothing serious, but it needed covering to prevent infection. He'd seen too many minor wounds turn septic during his tours of duty. The cell was pristine, like everything Xylosian, clinically white, geometrically perfect, and utterly devoid of comfort or character. Even the air smelled sterile, like a hospital's isolation ward. 6 hours since his capture, and he'd seen only the guards who had processed him, tall, silver-skinned humanoids with an almost mathematical precision to their movements. They'd taken his medical kit, his uniform, and his boots, leaving him with only the basics: undershirt, thermal pants, and the standard-issue identification chip embedded in his wrist that would be broadcasting his medical status and position to any nearby Federation receivers. Fat lot of good that would do him in the belly of a Xylosian dreadnought. Kale wasn't afraid. Not exactly. Fear required uncertainty, and he was fairly certain he knew what came next. Interrogation, information extraction, eventual prisoner exchange, if he was lucky. Standard operating procedure for both sides in this pointless, grinding war over resources and spheres of influence. He'd just finished securing the makeshift bandage when the cell door slid open with a soft hiss. For guards entered, weapons drawn. Far more security than seemed necessary for one unarmed medic. Stand, Terran, the lead guard ordered in the characteristic monotone of their species. Kale rose slowly, hands visible. Where to? Interrogation already? Your efficiency is impressive. The guard didn't respond to his mild sarcasm, instead securing heavy restraints around his wrists. You will accompany us immediately. You will speak only when addressed directly. You will comply with all instructions without delay. Chatty bunch, aren't you? Kale muttered as they escorted him from the cell. The journey through the vessel was disorienting. The corridors all looked identical to Kale's eyes. The same polished metal surfaces, the same recessed lighting strips, the same angular geometry. They passed several checkpoints, each requiring multi-layered biometric authentication from his escorts. Whatever their destination, it wasn't a standard interrogation chamber. When they finally entered a vast, cylindrical room dominated by a towering column of pulsating blue-white energy, Kale realized they had brought him to the heart of a ship, some kind of core engineering section. Dozens of Xylosian technicians moved with urgent purpose around complex workstations. The air hummed with tangible tension. And standing at the center of this controlled chaos was a female Xylosian whose very presence commanded the space around her. Even without insignia, Kale would have recognized authority in her bearing. This was no ordinary officer. Prisoner secured, Commander, announced the lead guard, forcing Kale to halt 5 meters from the woman. Her silver eyes assessed him with cold calculation, as if he were a piece of equipment rather than a living being. She was taller than the others, her silver-toned skin more luminescent, the ridge of cartilage that served as Xylosian brows more pronounced over eyes that seemed to contain galaxies of intelligence. I am Commander Krylar of the Xylosian Star Fleet, she stated without preamble. Your designation and specialization. Kale straightened instinctively. Sergeant Aaron Kale, Terran Federation, 42nd Medical Engineering Division. Your expertise includes quantum stabilization systems? The question surprised him. That's not typical interrogation material. Answer the question, Terran. Her voice remained perfectly level, but somehow conveyed imminent threat. Yes, I specialized in field repair of medical stasis pods and dimensional stabilizers for emergency transport units. The commander gave a curt nod to a nearby technician, who projected a holographic display of system schematics. Kale recognized the basic architecture immediately, a quantum stabilization matrix similar to those used in Terran vessels, but significantly modified and integrated with alien technology. This system is experiencing catastrophic instability, Commander Krylar stated. You will correct it. Kale glanced from the schematics to the pulsating core column, which now that he looked more closely, was flickering erratically. Just like that? Fix your ship or else. You have 13 minutes before irreversible cascade failure begins. The outcome will be the molecular disintegration of this vessel and all aboard. The reality of the situation hit him. This wasn't an interrogation, it was a desperate measure. Something had gone very wrong with their systems, and they'd run out of options. I'll need access to your diagnostic interface, and these restraints removed, he said, professional instincts taking over. Commander Krylar studied him for 3 long seconds before nodding to the guards. Remove his constraints. Maintain weapon readiness. As the restraints fell away, Kale moved toward the nearest console, scanning the alien interface. This system uses Terran stabilization architecture as its foundation, doesn't it? Captured tech from the Orion Belt. When the commander didn't answer, he continued, I need water, and a toolkit with microcalibrators and quantum refractors. You will use our equipment, she countered. Your equipment is calibrated for your systems. I'm working with human technology that's been integrated into your matrix. I need compatible tools. He pointed to the holographic display. And I need administrative access to these subsystems. Krylar's eyes narrowed dangerously. You will have restricted access only, under direct supervision. Then you'll have 11 minutes of me trying to work around your security protocols instead of fixing your ship, Kale replied evenly. Your choice, Commander. For the briefest moment, something that might have been uncertainty crossed her perfect features. Then she turned to her chief engineer. Provide him with the necessary tools. Grant temporary access to the stabilization subsystems only. Monitor every command. As the engineer hurried to comply, Kale added, and water. Your atmosphere composition is 20% more arid than what humans are designed for. If you want optimal cognitive function, I need hydration. The commander gestured to a guard, who departed immediately. Kale turned his attention to the system diagnostics, fingers flying across the alien interface. Despite the unfamiliar layout, the underlying principles were recognizable. Your engineers tried to forcibly override the emergency shutdown protocols, didn't they? He asked, not looking up from his work. Focus on the solution, not the cause, Krylar responded. The cause is the solution in this case, Kale explained, his voice taking on a measured tone he used when instructing field medics. Terran systems, especially military-grade ones, have embedded security measures against forced override. The more you push, the harder they lock down. It's like, he searched for a comparison they might understand, like trying to force open a pressure seal by increasing external pressure. You're just strengthening what you're trying to break. The guard returned with a container of water, which Kale drank gratefully before returning to work. The Xylosion toolkit provided was remarkably comprehensive once he understood the organization principles. He split his attention between the physical interface connections and the code architecture displayed on the holographic interface. The problem isn't just in the stabilization matrix, he said after several minutes of intensive diagnostic work. Your integration method created cascade vulnerabilities in adjacent systems. When the first anomaly appeared, your automatic responses triggered countermeasures in the Terran subsystems, which then, 9 minutes until irreversible cascade, interrupted a computerized voice. Less technical assessment, more solution, Commander Krylar instructed sharply. Kale didn't waste breath arguing. His hands moved between interfaces, occasionally reaching into the exposed panel near the base of the core column. I need to establish a communication bridge between the Terran security protocols and your main system. They need to recognize each other as authorized collaborators, not hostile entities. He worked methodically, occasionally muttering to himself about aggressive integration and ignoring compatibility architecture. The Xylosian engineers watched with a mixture of suspicion and fascination as he bypassed several layers of their own security to reach the original Terran code. "Your approach to technology integration is too linear," he commented as he worked. "You see each system as a component to be controlled rather than a participant in a network. Terran systems are designed with adaptive learning and contextual recognition. They respond to relationship, not just command." 7 minutes until irreversible cascade. Kale took a deep breath, then initiated a complex sequence across 3 separate interfaces. "I'm establishing a recognition protocol that will identify your command structure as an authorized administrative entity, not an invasive force. Once the Terran subsystems recognize you as authorized users rather than attackers, they should deactivate the defensive lockdown." The core column's pulsations began to stabilize slightly. Encouraged, Kale continued making adjustments, his movements growing more confident as the system responded to his touch. 5 minutes until irreversible cascade. "Almost there," murmured, fingers dancing across the interfaces. "The problem isn't just that your systems don't understand ours. Ours don't understand yours either. They're both trying to protect the ship using incompatible methodologies." With a final series of commands, Kale stepped back from the console. "Try your stabilization protocol now." The chief engineer looked to Commander Krylar, who gave a terse nod. He entered the command sequence, and the ship seemed to hold its breath. The core column's erratic pulsing gradually steadied, the violent energy fluctuations calming into a smooth, rhythmic flow. The threatening hum in the air diminished, replaced by the more reassuring background vibration of a properly functioning starship. "Quantum stabilization matrix returning to normal parameters," announced the computerized voice. "Cascade failure averted. All systems stabilizing." The tension in the room dissipated like air from a punctured balloon. Several of the Xylosian engineers exchanged looks that, while subtle, spoke volumes about their relief. Commander Krylar's expression remained unchanged, but her posture relaxed almost imperceptibly. "Explanation," she demanded, looking directly at Kale. "Your engineers were trying to force the systems to comply through dominance," he said, accepting another container of water from the guard. "Terran technology isn't designed to respond to force. It's designed to resist it. I created a mutual recognition protocol that allows the systems to communicate rather than fight each other." He gestured to the holographic display. "But you need to understand this is a temporary fix. The fundamental integration architecture is flawed. You've essentially forced 2 different languages to communicate without a proper translation matrix. It will break down again, possibly in more catastrophic ways." The commander studied him silently for a moment. "You will document the necessary permanent solutions." It wasn't a request. Kale nodded, understanding his value as a prisoner had just increased dramatically. "I'll need continued access to these systems and a more appropriate work environment than a detention cell. You will be provided with controlled access under continuous supervision," she replied. "Secure quarters will be arranged." She turned to her officers. "Establish a restricted workstation in secondary engineering. Level 4 security protocols. The prisoner will assist in implementing a permanent solution to the integration issues." As the guards moved to escort him from the core chamber, Kale caught the commander's gaze once more. For the briefest moment, something passed between them. Not gratitude, certainly not warmth, but perhaps the faintest acknowledgement of respect. Then the moment was gone, and he was being led away, no longer just a prisoner of war, but a valuable asset. He wasn't sure if that improved his situation or complicated it. What he couldn't know was how profoundly this interaction had already begun to change the immovable object that was Commander Krylar. The restricted workstation turned out to be a surprisingly well-equipped laboratory adjacent to the secondary engineering deck. Though 2 armed guards remained at constant attention and surveillance devices monitored his every move, Kale found the conditions vastly preferable to a detention cell. For 3 standard days, he worked systematically through the complex integration issues plaguing the Voidhammer systems. The Xylosion engineers assigned to monitor him maintained professional distance at first, watching his work with suspicious precision. But as he identified and resolved one critical vulnerability after another, their rigid demeanor began to soften incrementally. "Your approach is unconventional," commented the senior technical officer, Technics, on the second day. He had been observing Kale's work on the environmental control systems, which had developed anomalies similar to the stabilization matrix. "That's a diplomatic way of saying I'm breaking all your rules," Kale replied without looking up from the neural interface module he was reconfiguring. "The protocols exist for security and efficiency," Technic stated, though with less conviction than might be expected. Kale set down his tools and faced the Xylosion engineer. "Efficiency isn't always about the straightest line between 2 points. Sometimes it's about the most sustainable path. Your integration methods focus exclusively on immediate functionality without considering long-term system harmony." When Technics didn't immediately dismiss his observation, Kale continued, "Think of it like transplanting an organ. You can force the body to accept it through immunosuppressants, like your override protocols, or you can modify the organ to be recognized as compatible. The second approach takes longer initially, but prevents rejection crises later." The Xylosion tilted his head slightly, a gesture Kale had come to recognize as thoughtful consideration, an organic metaphor for mechanical systems. "All complex systems share fundamental principles," Kale shrugged. "Living or mechanical." Later that day, when the meal period arrived, Kale noticed the standard prisoner ration had been replaced with a more substantial offering. Additionally, a set of micro-calibration tools he had mentioned would be helpful had appeared at his workstation. No acknowledgement was made of these changes, but the message was clear: his value was being recognized. On the third day, one of the younger engineers approached while Kale was repairing a personal communication device. "That is not ship's equipment," the engineer observed cautiously. Kale glanced up at the small handheld unit. "It's the guard's personal communicator." The audio receptor was misaligned. He nodded toward the stoic guard standing at the doorway. "Hard to maintain proper security if you can't hear commands clearly." The guard's expression remained impassive, but he checked the newly repaired device with a subtle nod of approval when it functioned perfectly. "This is unusual behavior for a prisoner," the young engineer said. "Well, I'm a medic first, engineer second, prisoner third," Kale replied with a half-smile. "Force of habit to fix things that are broken." When the engineer continued to look perplexed, Kale added, "Where I come from, we have a saying, how you do anything is how you do everything. I can't turn off being who I am just because my circumstances have changed." These small interactions multiplied over the following days. Kale maintained his focus on the technical work assigned to him, but his natural tendency toward practical problem-solving extended beyond the official tasks. He suggested a more efficient configuration for the engineering team's shift rotation. He improvised a solution for a persistent coolant leak using materials at hand rather than waiting for replacement parts. He even diagnosed a peculiar joint stiffness one of the guards was experiencing as a reaction to the ship's gravitational adjustments. None of these actions were calculated to curry favor. They were simply the natural expressions of Kale's character, automatic as breathing. Yet their cumulative effect was a gradual shift in how he was perceived by those around him. Not quite an ally, certainly not an equal, but something more complex than merely enemy prisoner. Reports of these developments reached Commander Krylar, who found herself spending increasing amounts of time reviewing the surveillance records from secondary engineering. She told herself this was prudent security oversight of a valuable but potentially dangerous asset. Yet she could not explain why she often replayed the recordings of Kale's more mundane interactions or his quiet explanations to the engineering staff. On the 8th day after the stabilization crisis, Krylar entered the secondary engineering bay unannounced. The room fell instantly silent, the Xylosion staff snapping to rigid attention. Kale paused in his work but remained seated at his station, watching her with calm attentiveness. "Progress report," she demanded, addressing the senior technical officer but looking at Kale. The Terran has completed recalibration of the quantum stabilization matrix and implemented compatibility protocols for the primary and secondary environmental systems, Technics reported. Current project is security enhancement for the navigational interface. Commander Krylar moved to Kale's workstation, examining the complex code architecture displayed on his screen. You are improving our security? A curious choice for a prisoner. I'm reducing system conflicts that could endanger the ship, Kale corrected mildly. The fact that it also makes your systems more secure is a byproduct, not the objective. And what is your objective, Sergeant Kale? She asked, her silver eyes searching his face. Right now, staying alive. His expression remained open, honest, which coincidentally involves keeping the ship intact and functioning. The commander studied him for a moment longer. You will accompany me. The guards immediately moved to escort him, but Krylar raised a hand. That won't be necessary. At their evident confusion, she added, he has demonstrated sufficient rationality to understand his position. Without restraints, Kale followed the commander through the ship's corridors, noting the reactions of passing crew members, the surprised glances, the subtle expressions of confusion at seeing a Terran prisoner walking freely beside their commander. They entered a small observation chamber with a viewport looking out into the vast starscape. The room was otherwise empty, offering no clue to the purpose of this unexpected meeting. Your work has proven valuable, Krylar stated, standing with perfect posture as she gazed out at the stars. Thank you, Kale responded, unsure of the appropriate reply. This is not gratitude. It is assessment. She turned to face him. You approach systems differently than our engineers. You see patterns and relationships where we see components and hierarchies. Kale considered this. Different cultural philosophies produce different technological approaches. Xylosians value order, structure, efficiency. Humans value adaptability, resilience, intuition. Neither is inherently superior. They're just different solutions to the same problems. Yet in this case, the Terran approach proved more effective. In this specific context, he emphasized, because you are dealing with integrated Terran technology. In a purely Xylosian system, your methods would likely be optimal. The commander's expression shifted subtly, the equivalent of raised eyebrows on a human face. Most prisoners would seize the opportunity to claim superiority. I'm an engineer, Commander. I'm interested in what works, not who's better. He shrugged. Besides, if I were going to claim superiority, I'd pick something more impressive than debugging code architecture. For a brief moment, something that might almost have been amusement flickered in her silver eyes, quickly suppressed. She turned back to the viewport. I have received orders to rendezvous with the primary fleet in the Cassiopeian sector. Your expertise will continue to be required during this journey. Kale nodded. Understanding this was as close to official recognition of his changed status as he was likely to receive. He was still a prisoner, but now one with defined value and purpose. I've noticed potential inefficiencies in your propulsion systems, he offered. Nothing critical, but they're creating unnecessary strain on the power distribution network. Krylar regarded him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to evaluate every molecule of his being. Document your observations and submit them to technical officer Technics for assessment. As they departed the observation chamber, Kale couldn't help but notice that they were returning to secondary engineering, not to his secured quarters or a detention cell. The subtle shift in his status continued, unnamed but unmistakable. What neither of them could anticipate was how quickly these gradual changes would be tested in the crucible of catastrophe. Over the following weeks, Kale's role aboard the Voidhammer evolved into something unprecedented in Xylosian military history. Still officially a prisoner of war, he had become a de facto technical advisor. His expertise sought on matters ranging from propulsion efficiency to crew rotation schedules. Though always under surveillance, his movements through the engineering sections had become nearly unrestricted. Commander Krylar found herself in the unusual position of defending these arrangements to her superior officers during secure communications. She justified the decision with cold logic. The Terran's utility outweighed potential security risks, particularly given the integrated technologies aboard the vessel. What she didn't mention was how often she found herself considering problems from new perspectives, asking herself how the Terran engineer might approach a situation before making decisions. The most significant test of her evolving thought process came during a tactical engagement with a small Terran patrol near the disputed Arcturon boundary. Traditional Xylosian doctrine demanded immediate offensive action to neutralize the patrol vessels, despite the minimal threat they posed. Yet Krylar found herself considering the downstream consequences, the resources required, the potential for escalation, the ripple effects through both military hierarchies. In the end, she ordered evasive maneuvers instead of engagement, conserving resources and avoiding unnecessary conflict. Her officers were clearly surprised, but the logic of her decision proved sound when they intercepted communications indicating a much larger Terran force in an adjacent sector. The prisoner's influence is affecting your command decisions. Her first officer, Varys, ventured during a private briefing after the incident. The prisoner has no access to tactical information or command functions, Krylar replied sharply. I refer not to direct influence, Commander, but to methodological contamination. Your recent decisions show patterns inconsistent with optimal Xylosian doctrine. Rather than dismissing the observation, Krylar considered it carefully. If by contamination you mean adopting effective strategies regardless of their origin, then yes. Effectiveness supersedes doctrinal purity. This exchange lingered in her mind as she conducted her routine review of Kale's work. The Terran was developing a more efficient interface between the ship's defensive systems and power distribution, a project she had personally assigned after noticing how his previous modifications had improved overall system stability. Commander, the bridge communications officer, interrupted her thoughts. We're detecting a massive energy signature approaching from Sector 7. Configuration unknown. Krylar was on the bridge within moments, studying the anomalous readings on the main tactical display. Analysis? Not a vessel, Commander. Energy pattern suggests a natural phenomenon, but with unusual coherence. Possibly a quantum filament or dimensional fracture. Evasive course. Full power to shields. Insufficient time for evasive maneuvers, the navigation officer reported tensely. Impact in 47 seconds. All hands brace for contact, Krylar ordered, her voice steady despite the sudden danger. Divert additional power to forward shields. The collision, when it came, was unlike anything in her considerable combat experience. The Void Hammer shuddered violently as the energy phenomenon enveloped the forward section of the ship. Alert sirens blared as systems throughout the vessel fluctuated wildly. The bridge lighting failed momentarily before emergency power engaged. Damage report, Krylar demanded once the initial impact had passed. The reports flooded in from all sections. Power fluctuations across all decks. Gravitational systems destabilizing. But most critical, the primary shield generator had suffered catastrophic damage, its containment field collapsing. Shield generator overload imminent, the systems officer announced. Automated containment failing. Cascade reaction building in the generator core. Evacuate all personnel from adjacent sections, Krylar ordered immediately. Initiate emergency shutdown protocols. Shutdown protocols not responding, Commander. The system is locked in a power loop. If the generator goes critical, he didn't need to finish. Krylar knew exactly what would happen. The shield generator's power core would breach, releasing enough energy to destroy half the ship and everyone on it. Time to critical, she demanded. 10 minutes, 17 seconds at current progression rate. Krylar made her decision instantly. Locate Sergeant Kale. Priority alert. Less than 2 minutes later, Kale's voice came through the communications system from secondary engineering. I'm seeing the alerts. Shield generator core destabilizing. Correct. Shutdown protocols ineffective. Manual intervention required. There was a brief pause before Kale responded, his voice calm but urgent. I can see the diagnostic feed. The containment field is being sustained by a feedback loop from the secondary power couplings. It's channeling energy back into the core instead of dispersing it. Can it be corrected remotely? No. The emergency systems are in lockdown. Someone needs to physically sever the connection at the junction point and then manually initiate the dispersal sequence from the core control panel. Understood. I'll dispatch an engineering team. Commander, Kale interrupted, something she would have found unforgivable under any other circumstances. Your engineers won't know how to bypass the Terran security protocols in the dispersal sequence. The core is using modified Terran technology from the Orion campaign. I recognized the patterns. A heavy silence filled the bridge as the implications sank in. The radiation levels in the generator chamber will be lethal, the first officer stated. 9 minutes to critical failure, announced the systems officer. Kale's voice came through again, steady and determined. I know how to do this. I'm heading to the shield generator now. Sergeant Kale, you will await proper authorization, Krylar began, but the communication had already ended. She switched to the internal security feed, tracking Kale's progress through the ship. He was moving rapidly through the corridors, past confused crew members and security checkpoints. Security, intercept the prisoner at Junction 14C, Varys ordered. Belay that, Krylar countermanded instantly. Security, facilitates Sergeant Kale's access to the shield generator section. Priority clearance. The bridge fell silent, all eyes turning to the commander in astonishment. He is the only personnel aboard with the necessary expertise, she stated, her voice betraying no emotion. Tactical necessity supersedes security protocol. On the monitor, they watched as Kale reached the final security barrier before the shield generator section. The guards, having received their contradictory orders, hesitated momentarily before stepping aside to allow him passage. Kale paused at the entrance to the increasingly unstable section, gathering emergency tools and a basic radiation shield that would provide minimal protection at best. One of the guards offered him a more substantial protective suit, but he shook his head. No time. His voice came through the comms. The suit would slow me down too much. We need seconds, not safety. He disappeared into the radiation-flooded corridor beyond. Establish direct communication with the generator. Chamber, Krylar ordered. Channel open, Commander. Sergeant Kale, report your status. His voice came through, now labored as he moved through the increasingly dangerous environment. Approaching the main junction. Radiation levels. Higher than expected. The containment field is deteriorating faster than the readings showed. They could hear his breathing, heavy and determined, as he navigated the hazardous path to the core. 7 minutes to critical failure. I can see the coupling junction, Kale reported. The feedback loop is exactly what I thought. Terran emergency protocols cross-wired with Xylosian power distribution. The sound of tools against metal came through the communication channel, punctuated by Kale's increasingly strained breathing. First coupling disconnected. Moving to the second. Damn, it's fused. Need to cut through manually. Krylar found herself leaning forward, hands gripping the command console with unusual tension. Time remaining? 5 minutes, 40 seconds to critical failure. Almost. Got it. Kale's voice was becoming weaker, affected by the radiation exposure. Second coupling severed. Moving to the core control panel now. The bridge crew watched the sensor readings as the energy levels in the generator began to fluctuate wildly, no longer increasing, but still dangerously unstable. The panel is locked down, Kale reported, coughing. Need to bypass the security interlocks. These are definitely Terran protocols. 4 minutes to critical failure. Talk me through what you're seeing, Krylar directed, her voice betraying uncharacteristic urgency. Control matrix is in defensive lockdown. Needs authentication sequence, but standard codes won't work in this state. Need to create a bypass. They could hear him working, the sounds of equipment being modified interspersed with increasingly labored breathing and occasional coughs. Vital signs deteriorating. The medical officer reported quietly, monitoring the emergency biometric sensors. Severe radiation exposure. Organ systems beginning to fail. Krylar silenced him with a look. Got it. Kale's voice came through, triumphant despite its weakness. Bypass the authentication. Initiating. Manual dispersal sequence. The sensor readings on the bridge showed the energy levels beginning to diminish as the dangerous energy was safely channeled into dispersion conduits. It's working, Kale reported, his voice now barely above a whisper. Core stabilizing. Dispersal at 60%. Should continue automatically now. 2 minutes to safe levels. The systems officer confirmed, the relief in his voice unmistakable. Sergeant Kale, withdraw from the chamber immediately, Krylar ordered. There was no response. Sergeant Kale, acknowledge. The only sound through the communication channel was increasingly labored breathing. I can't move, came his eventual response, so faint they could barely make out the words. Too much exposure. Need to finish the sequence. The medical officer's expression was grim as he studied the bioreadings. Commander, the prisoner's cellular degradation is critical. Organ systems failing. Dispatch medical team to the shield generator entrance. Priority 1, Krylar ordered. Core. Dispersal. Complete. Kale's voice came one last time. Ship. Safe. Then silence. Sergeant Kale, respond. Krylar's voice held an unfamiliar tension. Aaron Kale, respond immediately. The bioreadings flatlined. Shield generator has returned to stable parameters, the systems officer reported. Disaster averted. The bridge fell into a heavy silence. The victorious moment strangely hollow. Commander, Varys approached cautiously. We should secure the contaminated area and assess ship-wide damage. Krylar stood immobile, her eyes fixed on the lifeless bioreadings. When she finally spoke, her voice was unnaturally controlled, each word precisely measured. Implement full decontamination protocols for the generator section. Begin repair assessment on all affected systems. Status report in 1 hour. She turned and walked toward the bridge exit with measured steps. Commander? Varys questioned, clearly confused by her departure during a crisis situation. You have the bridge, first officer, she stated without turning back. Krylar moved through the corridors of the Void Hammer with mechanical precision, her face an expressionless mask. Crew members stepped aside quickly, sensing something different, something dangerous in their commander's demeanor. None dared address her. Her path took her inexorably toward the shield generator section, now sealed behind heavy radiation barriers. Medical and decontamination teams worked at the perimeter, setting up equipment to retrieve what remained of Sergeant Aaron Kale when radiation levels permitted entry. She dismissed them with a gesture. Confused but obedient, they retreated to a respectful distance, watching uncertainly as their commander stood alone before the sealed entryway. Behind that barrier lay the body of an enemy soldier who had given his life to save a ship full of his captors. The logical Xylosian perspective would classify this as a rational choice. His value as a prisoner was less than the collective value of the Void Hammer and its crew. The equation was simple. Yet as Krylar stood before the sealed door, something alien and uncomfortable stirred within her perfectly ordered mind. Not grief. She had no attachment to the Terran. Not guilt. She had not ordered his sacrifice. Something else. Something that defied the neat categorizations of Xylosian thought. The realization struck her with unexpected force. It was respect. Deep, profound respect for the man who had walked willingly into certain death with the same methodical competence he had applied to every task. No heroic declarations. No negotiation for freedom or recognition. Just calm problem-solving until his final breath. In that moment, Commander Krylar of the Xylosian Star Fleet, feared leader of the Void Hammer, understood something that had eluded her throughout her exemplary career. The Terran engineer had demonstrated a form of efficiency that Xylosian doctrine had never considered. The efficiency of compassion, of service that transcended tactical advantage or self-preservation. Her guards and officers watched in stunned silence as their commander slowly, deliberately knelt before the sealed door. Her spine, always perfectly straight with military precision, bent in a gesture no Xylosion would ever show to an enemy. It was not a dramatic gesture. There were no tears. Xylosians did not cry. No words. None were adequate. Just the simple, unprecedented action of the most powerful woman on the ship, kneeling like a servant before the sealed tomb of an enemy who had become something else entirely. The guards exchange shocked glances, uncertain whether to interrupt or look away from this inexplicable breach of protocol. None dared move. Krylar remained kneeling for precisely 60 seconds, an eternity in the context of Xylosian military decorum. When she rose, her face had resumed its customary impassivity, but something fundamental had shifted behind her silver eyes. Prepare a formal record of Sergeant Aaron Cale's actions, she instructed the nearest officer. When decontamination is complete, his remains will be preserved with full military honors until they can be returned to his people. His actions will be accurately reported in all official documentation of this incident. The officer struggled to maintain his professional demeanor. Commander, regulations regarding enemy casualties do not. Regulations, Krylar interrupted with quiet intensity, do not account for all variables. She turned and walked away, leaving her bewildered crew to contemplate the unprecedented scene they had witnessed. In the privacy of her quarters later that cycle, Commander Krylar reviewed the ship's status reports with her usual thoroughness. The shield generator was operational again. Repairs to damaged systems were proceeding efficiently. The ship would rendezvous with the fleet on schedule. Yet as she prepared the formal incident report for High Command, she paused over the section detailing Sergeant Cale's role. Xylosian reports were factual, devoid of subjective assessment or emotional content. They documented actions and outcomes, not character or motivation. For the first time in her distinguished career, Krylar found the standard format inadequate. After a moment's consideration, she added a single sentence to the otherwise regulation-perfect report. The Terran engineers' actions demonstrated a form of efficiency worthy of study and consideration within our own doctrines. It was a small thing, easily overlooked by anyone not familiar with the rigid constraints of Xylosian communication. Yet in those carefully chosen words lay the seeds of something revolutionary. The acknowledgement that there might be wisdom to be found beyond the boundaries of their perfectly ordered world. As the stars streamed past her viewport, Commander Krylar contemplated the unfamiliar terrain her thoughts now traversed. The war continued. The mission remained. Her duty was unchanged. Yet something fundamental had shifted, a hairline crack in the flawless crystal of her certainty. The Terran was gone, but the questions he had awakened would remain, unanswerable yet insistent, like the echo of a voice in an empty room. In the vast silence of space, aboard a ship saved by an unexpected sacrifice, the steel-hearted commander continued her journey, carrying within her the memory of the moment she had knelt like a servant before an enemy who had taught her, in his final act, that there existed forms of strength beyond those defined by power and control. And in that memory lay the possibility of change.